The Siskiyou Resource Conservation District was established in 1949. Soil conservation districts were originally empowered to manage soil and water resources for conservation, but these powers were expanded in the early 1970s to include related resources, such as fish and wildlife habitat. The objective of forming locally led conservation districts like the Siskiyou RCD is to allow landowners and managers to have a voice about the conservation, restoration, and overall health of their land. The Siskiyou District includes the entire Scott River watershed, portions of the Salmon River, and a small piece of the Klamath River. The Siskiyou RCD's formal mission is to identify conservation and watershed enhancement needs and offer assistance to landowners and resource managers to meet those needs through technical, financial, and educational leadership. The Siskiyou RCD's approach and focus in carrying out this mission is to work with the community to seek solutions to address and mitigate resource concerns within the district. We do that by strategically planning projects with landowners, stakeholders, funding organizations, and government agencies. A big part of what the RCD has done and continues to do is to assist landowners with regulatory compliance, including helping with financial burden, logistics, materials procurement, and labor. One example of this is the RCD's collaboration with landowners on the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board's Total Maximum Daily Load, or TMDL program. The goal of TMDLs, according to the original framework from the California State Water Resources Board, is to establish daily pollution loads for waterways throughout the state. Scott River water users were deemed to be non-point source or indirect polluters, so at the time of implementation, the North Coast Regional Board put in place a waiver of waste discharge requirements, meaning that water users and landowners in the Scott River watershed do not have to pay individual fees associated with the TMDL program. Rather, they are expected to comply with standards that are set forth in the language of the waiver. Throughout the years, the RCD has collaborated with the Regional Water Quality Control Board and landowners to comply with the waiver in an effort for stream restoration and conservation.
My name's Eli Scott. I am the Scott and Shasta Watershed Steward for the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. My role within the Regional Water Board is to essentially implement the TMDL in the Scott and Shasta watersheds. So I make sure that the action plans that were established for the TMDLs are implemented, and then also work at understanding sort of a watershed-wide approach to protecting water quality. There was data that showed that water quality objectives in the Scott were not being met by the basically the current conditions, and that triggered basically the TMDL to be written. The TMDL was looking at what are the sources of those impairments, which were increased temperature, increased load of fine sediment, and then it establishes a action plan that describes how those sources would be controlled to minimize the loading of temperature and fine sediment into waterways to allow for the support of beneficial use. The TMDL conditional waiver was a way for the Regional Water Board to look at those impacts and address them in a way that both supports the resource and also puts a nod to agricultural practices that are kind of the backbone of Siskiyou County. The way I kind of look at the waiver is it's the beginning of a conversation about water quality that's going to last for multiple years, maybe decades, depending on the landowner and the issues that need to be addressed. What the waiver really allows me to do is go out there and have a conversation about water quality with a rancher, have us look at the same piece of ground at the same time and talk through any differences that come about and come to a common understanding about how that landowner can best protect water quality. The way the Regional Water Board regulates water quality is we regulate discharges of waste. And waste in the state of California is defined as sewage or other waste substances that are liquid, solid, gaseous, radioactive, and associated with human habitation or from human or animal origin. pollution specifically in California is any means that alters the quality of water to a degree that unreasonably affects beneficial uses. And beneficial uses are there's tons of them. So there's agricultural uses are beneficial uses, recreation uses are beneficial uses, fish and wildlife resources are beneficial uses. Basically, anything that uses water in a beneficial way is considered a beneficial use. And we look at what's the most sensitive of those uses that's being impacted by the pollution. The State Water Resources Control Board sets what permit fees are, and they have not required us to have a fee with the Scott waiver. We can't guarantee that that's going to go on forever. So at some point in the future, the state board is going to tell us that we have to charge a fee associated with this waiver. And what we've talked about in the current waiver is that we would like to approach any future fees in sort of a tiered manner. So folks who have come in and are working with us cooperatively and have been for years and are, implementing best practices on their property that we are seeing are having a minimal impact on water quality and are protecting water quality, we want them to come in at the lowest fee possible. For other folks who haven't sort of come into the fold yet, or for folks who have a higher risk of water quality on their property that's going to translate to more staff time at the regional board, they're likely going to come in at a higher fee. And the reason for that is that we are basically a fee-supported agency. Different permitting fees equate to staff time. So when there's more staff time associated with a particular ranch, that means there's likely going to be a higher fee associated with that ranch. Folks have been managing their land in a whole host of different ways in the Scott Valley, but a lot of folks have been doing it the right way from the beginning. Before we even stepped in, people were being proactive about water quality. They're being proactive about riparian zones. The science in the last 20 years has really caught up with those practices. And so if you look at some ranches, they move their cattle in such a way that they don't need to fence anywhere. They have great riparian zones just because they're always moving their cows through different pastures. There's ways to progressively and proactively manage your property where I'm going to come out there and be like, yeah, everything looks great. You're doing the right thing. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge there is a history of good land stewardship in the Scott and in Siskiyou County in general. And a lot of the practices that are in the waiver, they come from the agricultural science community, but they also come from things we've seen on the ground that have worked in the Scott Valley. The real opportunity right now, before the next waiver, which will kick in 2023, is for folks to come to us to have me out on their property to see what water quality concerns I might have and be proactive about working with the Regional Water Board to, get on the path towards compliance, because that's going to be beneficial for them in the long run. It's not going to hit their pocketbook as hard, and it's going to make sure the fee that they are eventually at some point going to have to face is going to be as low as possible.
My name is Lori Bundy. I'm an ag engineer for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. I serve the North Coast counties of California, including Siskiyou County. I've been working with the NRCS since 2000. I started in Weaverville and worked there for 3 years and then transferred to the Wairika field office in 2003. And I've been working out of that office ever since. I've worked with many, if not most, all of the large private landowners in Scott Valley. For TMDL type projects that would benefit an individual landowner, a suite of practices for a customer who comes in who might be encouraged to do water quality projects to benefit the in-stream and reduce sediment and temperature impacts would be to do a fencing with controlled access, maybe for flash grazing and a prescribed grazing plan. Maybe they'd also want to do some planting to accelerate what the natural process would be for recovery. After you determine what the resource concern is with the customer, then you go out and you determine what the inventory is on the landscape. Where's the water sources, where they need to be grazing, where the impact areas can be, where the sensitive areas are that you have to avoid, and evaluate those systems and then present that alternative to the landowner and find out what type of system makes sense for their program, for their business, their economics, what their lifestyle is, what their goals are. Once they determine what system works best for them, then we would find out if we could provide some financial assistance for them. After getting through the resource concern and coming up with the field work that determines the inventory and evaluation, what's feasible, what's needed, then we develop all the alternatives and just present that to the landowner, and they pick that alternative. We never tell them what they should do. Working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, they sort of define what they have to accomplish, and that gives the sideboards for the landowner to pick a preferred alternative. The components for an alternative stock water system would be developing the water source. If it's not there, that could be a well, or it could be a spring if it's determined to be really reliable, and then a piping system to a trough where they would be able to have a heavy use area that's managed so that there's not disturbance to the landscape, and there might be a storage tank that would be part of that system, make sure they had adequate water. So that's what an alternative stock water system would look like. So for a bank stabilization project, regulatory environment is different than it was historically. NRCS was very well known for their bank stabilization projects that were 100% effective. Generally, the ecological impacts may not have been as desirable. Pure rock in a system generally is a foreign treatment. It's not something that nature would naturally do on its own. Most of those systems were dominated by vegetation, and then you throw in a bunch of rock in it, there's quite a bit of adjustment. So the systems now are much less bomb-proof. They're going to have some more adjustments now. You're going to have a lot more woody material and more of considered a soft treatment. So the combination of engineering and biology and understanding the system to determine what the treatment should be means that those type of treatments are more difficult to get accomplished. For a landowner to get all the environmental compliance accomplished on their own, all the permitting that's needed, usually there's permits from the national and state agencies, and that could be expensive and timely, so we look for a partner at least to handle the permitting. But generally, it would be a pretty small project for a landowner to be able to afford bank stabilization on their own.
Hi, my name is Becca Reeves, and I'm a Partners Biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The Partners program was developed to help private landowners successfully implement wildlife habitat restoration projects on their properties. In our watershed, we have many different wildlife species affected by water quality. Freshwater mussels help filter water but can be smothered by too much fine-grained sediment. Pacific tree frogs, tailed frogs, and yellow-legged frogs all hide beneath in-stream rocks and need crevices to escape predators. Since they breathe through their skin, they are sensitive to any chemicals in the water. Salmon are probably the most well-known and most sensitive species to water temperature and sediment loads. The 3 salmon species found in this watershed all require clean and specific size gravels to spawn. When the balance of sediment is off, salmon either can't construct their redds or nests, or the eggs don't get enough oxygen to develop. Salmon also need cold water to survive as adults. In my experience, landowners and wildlife alike both benefit most when streams and rivers are given the elbow room to function naturally. Over time, rivers naturally move around the valley floor, so whenever possible, it's better in the long run to keep valuable infrastructure like houses, roads, and utilities as far from the river as possible. Having a healthy buffer of trees, shrubs, flowering plants, and grasses on each side of the waterway will help reduce stream bank erosion caused by high water events. Stream buffers also provide habitat for pollinating insects, raptors, and other birds, which can help control pest rodents and insects in nearby fields. I've had the privilege of working with many landowners, and all have cared deeply about the lands they manage. Often, the most effective conservation strategies are beneficial to both wildlife and the landowner. Giving the river enough room, planting native trees and shrubs, and allowing an ecological process to recover can all be cost-effective ways to improve in-stream and streamside habitat for fish and wildlife. One of my favorite species to partner with are beavers, since they can help jumpstart some of the in-stream processes that help reverse legacy impacts like gold mining and channel straightening. Since rivers connect us to our up and downstream neighbors, challenges are often greater than one landowner can tackle alone. The best and most effective stream restoration projects I have seen consider the river at a broader reach scale and work to reverse the underlying causes rather than trying to put a Band-Aid on a local issue. Landowners can keep an eye toward perennial deep-rooted vegetation, whether it's a healthy balance of oaks and wildflowers in the uplands, deep-rooted grasses and other plants in the valley bottoms, or willows and cottonwoods along streams and rivers. All will help keep soil in place and support a variety of wildlife species. Healthy plant roots help build soil productivity and improve water percolation into the groundwater table while supporting the above-ground vegetation that forms the base of the food web. Reaching out to neighbors and to the larger community can also be very important. Restoration strategies and best management practices are always improving, and neighbors may have already had success with the new process. Working together can really make a difference. Since the Partners Program first began 30 years ago, our office has worked with many landowners across hundreds of acres. We've helped restore native plants, which provide a foundation for a healthy food web. We provide information on wildlife-friendly forest management and how to improve stream habitat for a variety of aquatic species. The Partners Program is a great resource for landowners looking to improve fish and wildlife habitat. There are 3 restoration biologists at the Wairika office, including a botanist, and each has a network of other professionals to help landowners find the answers they seek.
My name is Ben Corley, and my wife and son and I live here on the Miners Creek Ranch. That is, it's about 90 irrigated acres that have frontage on French Creek. We run now 60 pair on the grass here year-round, and we have a stockwater system that was put in by the RCD a number of years ago before I took over the lease here. The stockwater system, as far as our cows drinking water, the stockwater system comprises 100% of that. We do still retain our stockwater right off of our diversion. In the event that the stockwater system were to fail, we could still have water for our cattle. But our cattle do not have access to French Creek. There's the entire length of French Creek on our property is fenced off. So this water system has really made it possible to winter cows on this property without having to keep water in the ditches. And it's been really nice in the summertime. All I have to think about is where my irrigation water is going. I don't have to worry about running extra water in different ditches for the cows to drink out of, because we have this awesome stockwater system that's the cost is completely offset by solar panels, powered completely by solar panels. And there's a few little like hiccup, growing pain, logistical things. A few cloudy days in a row, I would say 3 to 4, then we don't have water for the cattle. The pumps won't run, and the pads surrounding the tanks aren't quite big enough, so we've gotten some erosion issues with that, but thankfully nothing anywhere close to the creek. But yeah, all in all, it's been, obviously I can't think of it without them, because they were here when I got here, and it's been really instrumental to our success here.
Water quality is a core tenet of having a healthy ecosystem, really. And so coming up with creative ways to address that is important, and it's always going to change. in the 90s and early 2000s, the RCD did a lot of these really what we'd consider probably routine projects now: fencing, planting, stock water systems, fish screens. So what's the next need that we have in this community? And some of the needs have persisted, and there's still pieces to be done. So like stock water systems is a good example, where we've done a lot of stock water systems, but there's still folks who need stock water systems. Or, you know, their management situation has changed where they could benefit from stock water systems now. I would envision an area where the RCD could also provide leadership and guidance in exploring other kind of new innovative ideas and options for really water conservation is kind of where this is trending. I think we're just coming into the point where we have some leadership that's really ready to steer us in the direction that the community needs, and the community needs have evolved over time. To me, kind of the next question is what are the next set of routine types of projects that are forward thinking that we can look at and partner with community members on doing now? It really might be irrigation efficiencies. How can we apply that water more effectively to where it's needed? You know, there's some folks that are probably already taking a really active role in managing water quality on their property. There's other folks that might be limited by access to equipment, funding, resources, engineering to do some of those things, but they want to do them. And that's kind of where the RCD comes in. It's how can we elevate the folks that see the direction that they want to take their property? How can we provide them information and resources, specific professional and technical services to maybe develop those types of projects? And then how can we support them in securing funding sources to actually implement and construct, whatever it takes to carry out those actions? So that collectively, as a watershed, we can show the progress that we're already doing, assist folks who have the inclination to address water quality work on their property, and ultimately, collectively move forward in meeting the standards set forth by the Water Board.